Hi, everybody, and today we're going to talk about something. I think it's something very, very important about staying young and just stay crazy. You know, like
Yeah, we were talking before about what's the essence of really kind of, I don't know, being alive and just maintaining an enthusiasm for living and creativity and everything. So we said, well, you should adopt the same attitude as kids do. I mean, you look at kids; they're sort of really wild and free and spontaneous, and they're basically kind of being crazy in a really good, positive way.
but also, like all the time, I remember when I was a kid and I was looking at successful people and I'm thinking, oh, wow, they like a children, like they've got this energy and they just like, they're so playful, and it's really interesting. Just have a look at people like, for example, Einstein or David Attenborough, and they, like you look at that David Attenborough and anybody can relate to him. If you look at it like 2 years old, 4 years old, 11 years old, 13 years old, like 50 years old, because he's so playful and he's so like, if you put it this way, he's a very serious child, and it's people like this, what they do, they just generate like all this really warmth, and they generate this, they just like have this gravitational pull towards themselves because they're so friendly and they so like they've got this youthfulness about them, childish about them, and because you have these qualities, you just open for new ideas, you're not sort of like stagnated into old waters, if you put it this way.
But it's so difficult to maintain that, really, because obviously as you get older, you're kind of weighed down with responsibilities and obligations, and it's just kind of really easy for all of that drive and enthusiasm to dissipate.
By the way, like, let's hold a thought, because in the next podcast we will actually cover responsibility and being pulled down with all these attachments from a society.
No, I don't want to talk about that.
Then you can't move, like about owning a house, for example, about like renting, owning a house, and adults' responsibilities. I think like I would love to cover that because it is important for me. And it was actually recently eye-opener when Elon Musk said about that he's selling all his possessions. But I really want to cover it because like certain information I just didn't know. I did not know.
Well, it's not really
because it's been fed to us,
raised in the public consciousness, all that kind of
exactly
attitude. It's more well, especially here in Australia, and we basically imported the concept from America, which is the dream.
You have a look all in other countries.
The dream home.
Same thing in Russia. It's been.
No, it wasn't.
Oh yes, right now, yes.
Oh, now,
it's
not
very,
earlier.
Very important.
Not earlier.
Like
earlier, you rented flats, and nobody used home ownership as a status symbol. Nobody was desperate to own a home, were you? You were all happy renting.
Well, yes, but look, of course...
It's only when you came here that you were kind of, I suppose you could say poisoned with this whole idea of ownership, of status.
Well, this is a really difficult point for me, really sore point for me.
Because you can use that.
I would love to cover it in a separate podcast. I think it is so important.
Because you wouldn't have been in a position...
everybody should know that. Because, you see, if I knew it, I don't know, 20 years ago, I would have been much happier person what I know right now.
Okay, so knowing it now, are you happier?
Of course I'm happier. Of course I'm happier. But look, I will still gravitate toward this because I said, look, house is not important. How house looks is not important. What kind of car you've got, it's not important, because for a lot of people, it does, like, it's really important which car you drive, how clean is your house and the rest of it, and how important it is, like when you've got the children.
But it's probably easy
house.
to say that because we're older, but if you're younger, it's such a...
The problem is when you're younger, you want everything. You want this luxury, you want this, you want that. And usually, like, if you come from a poor country, like, you gravitate towards that because you think, you are achiever, and how you display your achievements through the possessions. And this is the most insane thought. This is all to do with your self-fulfillment. It's absolutely upside down, because instead of concentrating on something important for in yourself as a human being, you're thinking about affordability of houses, and you spend money instead of building up your own future and spending money on your project and projects, and spending money on your own future and your dreams. What do, you just push all this money into the car and the house, and then struggle to try to pay it off. This is not a way to live. But I'd really like to extensively cover that, and why I think this way, and why I'm talking about it, because it is important. It's important part, because this is really, we're squandering our creativity, our creative mind for something we shouldn't even think about, because it's not even profitable for us anyway.
Yeah, well, but I think, as you said, we'll talk about that in a future podcast. But I think today what we'll talk about is exactly what you said about just absolutely maintaining that kind of excitement and energy, and just not letting yourself lose that sort of vitality as you get older. And as you said, Einstein is a really interesting example, because a lot of people might not be aware, but he really enjoyed what we would call goofing around. Like, he really used to muck around, and there's a famous photo of him with his sticking his tongue out, because that was actually that I would actually say that's a crucial part of his character, because at worst, a lot of adults might look at that and be really dismissive about it and say, he was captured, in a candid moment that caught him completely off guard or something. In other words, it was a kind of an aberration to his normal behavior. But the thing is that was not an aberration. It was not, something that just happened as an accident or whatever. It's actually critical to his whole thought process. In other words, I would actually go as far as saying, if he was not childlike, he probably wouldn't have come up with his famous formula. In other words, his mind needed to be playful. The way that his brain and his thought processes were energized by the playfulness led to the conceptualization of his, many theoretical contributions, which are, fundamental to modern science. And the other interesting thing too, which is directly connected with that, is the fact that, and maybe a lot of people don't know this as well, he played the violin. He was actually a very proficient violinist. And he actually said himself that in order for his thoughts to kind of be playful, and for his brain to wander, to just be free to kind of explore all sorts of ideas, he would improvise on the violin. And by improvising on a violin, he would encourage, if you like, his thought processes to be experimental. And it was only by encouraging those experimental thought processes that he was able to venture into a completely unexplored area, if you like, and come up with his formula.
And how amazing it is, because if you look at it like science, creativity, art.
Well, science and art, science and art are two sides of the same coin. I mean, it's what we've done in modern society. I don't even know for how long that has existed, but we have completely artificially separated art from science. You know, the humanities are on sort of one side. You've got the humanities
And
people.
it's a sort of on a lower level. It's just
yeah. You've got exactly.
It's sort of like for
You've got
losers,
science on
you know?
top. You got It's exactly right. You've got sort of science on top, and all the people who are in the sciences are kind of in one corner, looking down at the people in the humanities, and sort of very arrogant. And then you've got in the other corner, you've got all the humanities people. You know, the arts people. And they've been divided, but it's a completely artificial division, because you look at people like Da Vinci and Michelangelo, and all you look at some of these sort of founding figures of I would say not only scientific inquiry, but I would say the great figures of sort of recent history. Contribution to science and art in recent history. And they saw no division between science and art. For them, science and art was one and the same. It was intertwined together. It was indivisible. They didn't see any separation. I mean, I'm sure if they were around today, if Michelangelo was around today, he would be completely bewildered. He'd be confused and say, well, why have you guys separated it? Why do you have one faculty of science over there and a separate faculty for humanities? To him, I'm certain it would be inconceivable that you would separate the two. Because, I mean, even if you look at it, painting is a science. Any art form is a science. And to be a scientific thinker, you have to think artistically. You have to think freely. I mean, you look at, for example, let's take the example, the most extreme example. You take string theory, for example, which is really, for all intents and purposes, pretty absurd and pretty crazy. You listen to videos on YouTube about the Japanese-American theoretical physicist Michio Kaku, which, if you get a chance, just listen to him talking about string theory. Listen to him explaining string theory, and tell me that is not the musings of a fantastic imagination. I mean, it's an amazing theory, and I don't know whether it's, I don't know how it relates to the actual reality of the foundation of matter in the universe. But you listen to it, and it's just it sounds like it sounds purely like science fiction. It just sounds like a fantasy. But the point
this is really interesting, because Aelita was listening these lectures of Michio Kaku, and she just immediately she was so inspired, and she just was she so could relate to all that.
Yeah, that's exactly the point. Yeah, she hooked into it immediately.
This is just, she says, listen, it's actually really interesting, because in 2016, when she had a museum show in St. Petersburg, she said in an interview, and I first time heard it from her, because it's really interesting to hear your child in an interview, and you just realize that if you're listening like a totally third person, it looks like you're listening in on something, And I just realized, my gosh, I don't think I even know half of what or understand her so fully, because I'm just mom.
But the interesting,
she said, she mentioned, she says, listen, everything in the universe has sound. We just can't hear it. Afterwards, somebody received, a few scientists received a Nobel Prize for actually exactly the same thought in the same year. And I was fascinated by that, because you see how intuitive we are. We're such intuitive creatures. And it's
so what
really
do you, hang on.
because natively,
So what do you
kids are natively, they really know, they really feel, they really can probably imagine things we can't imagine. Of course, they imagine it, and adults will prove it mathematically or with mathematical formulas.
But you need the imagination to actually conceive of it in the first place.
And I guess what she said? She said, well, but from 6 years of age, she started doing it, because center of her artworks was violin, and she was explaining it afterwards why it was a violin, because of a string theory. because like this is a foundation of our existence.
Yeah, because she was watching documentaries about all these theoretical physicists' ideas, and who knew that she would actually artistically demonstrate that kind of represented by as you said, putting the violin with strings on it, and then she explained why she did it, and as you said, like it was just. It was actually a shock, and it was really amazing because unless it's exactly what you said, unless you give a child freedom to express herself or himself, you as a parent will never really be aware of the depth to which your child is thinking and critically. You'll never be aware of the depth of their thoughts or or how extensive their thoughts are unless you give them that room, the space to actually talk about something, to vocalize their ideas or to express them creatively. And it's precisely what you said, that because Aelita was in an interview situation, we as parents were actually listening to her for the first time and thinking, oh my God, I didn't know she knew that. And the way she expressed it too.
It's really interesting because she said that we can't hear it. Humans, can't hear so many things. We can't hear like the pretty much everything in this universe. It talks to us. It's all displays the sound, but we just can't hear it. Simply can't hear it. But how fascinating it is that child gets a sound and gets a thought. Like sometimes we're saying thought is material. Yes, it is. It is. If you look at it, and then she gets a thought, the scientific thought, and she expresses it all in her own interpretation on a canvas. How cool is that?
Yeah,
you see what children are capable of, and I think it is so important. And we just received also recently, Alita posted on her Instagram, she posted the realistic horse. She loves absolutely horses and draws them.
Oh, the sketch of her horses?
Yeah, from day one, pretty much. Horses are just only what I can... They're just mad about horses. But anyway, and she posts a horse, drawing of a horse on her Instagram, and you're getting so many people responding to it. And just one lady, she said, "Oh my goodness, to be able to accomplish the." As a drawer, you really have to, like a teacher was telling us, just draw the horses all the time. And she said, "Oh, I'm a pensioner right now, and you so inspire me. I have to go and do it again."
Oh, so the pensioner was inspired.
Yes,
by
she said. She said, sorry, she's a retiree, like she's retired from her work right now. I'm not sure how old is she. Look, you can retire at any time, just inspiration, pure inspiration. But you see, like how adults getting inspiration from a kid, and how wonderful is that? And
that doesn't happen very often. That a child can so powerfully inspire an adult. Well, in this case, probably a pensioner. Somebody that's so old being inspired and basically infused with the energy of a kid. But this is
what we're talking about, that how important this. Look at the Kusama, this incredible Japanese artist.
People might not know. So Yayoi Kusama is one of the leading artists in the world, and she is. Well, you can tell people about her.
My goodness, I'm not sure. I think she's close to 90.
Yeah, she's 9. I'll just say one thing. She's 90 years old, and there's this great documentary that was released about her. I think it was last year, and it's amazing because right at the start of the video, the video begins with her saying, "The canvas can't keep up with me." She says, "Oh, I paint so fast."
Oh my gosh, sorry, she's 91.
91. Okay, you've just googled that, so she's 91.
Yes, born in 1929.
And she's 91. She's 91, and she talks with so much passion. I just love that. She said that I work so fast the canvas can't keep up with me. You know, how many 90-year-olds talk like that? And I'm thinking, you sound like a kid. You literally sound like a
But
child.
she is actually looks like a kid as well. You know, like she's got a little
And I love the
red
way she
bob.
dresses with all her amazing kimono and all her makeup and the red hair, the bob, and you know, she looks like this sort of like a kind of I don't know, like an animated geisha or something. It's just this really amazing, you know, this amazing 90-year-old.
But you see, like it's so much energy, so
Yeah,
much
yeah,
creativity, and like because of her energy and creativity, we're fooled by thinking that she's a child. If you look at it, this is why
It
she
makes
sends
you
us a
youthful.
signal.
Yes,
Look,
yeah,
I am a child
yeah,
because
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
so enthusiastic.
Yeah.
I'm so open-minded.
Yeah.
I'm so creative. And I'm so
Yeah,
naive. There's certain naivety is
Right.
constantly there
Yep,
because
yep, yep.
if you're losing this naivety, I can
And spontaneity. She's so
Yes.
spontaneous. I mean, you can see that she's not even really. She's not going into all these sort of really complicated thought processes or whatever. She's just doing it. She's just kind of continuing her art, whichever way it leads to her. So this is amazing. Yeah, there's childlike spontaneity.
But I think it's fascinating, and keep it in mind. Look what kids are doing. You know, like just
Well, that's what we were amazed at when we had Olita and we were in the kindergarten and that's probably one of the very few places where I've witnessed that kind of amazing dynamism. You know, I mean, I was actually personally shocked. I went in there and it was like this, incredible sort of art factory. It's like something that Warhol would have arranged in the 60s. All these kids head down, spontaneously creating, and I'm thinking, well, this is amazing. This is like like an art factory around the world. And then kids go to regular schools and it's all sort of lost. It's just squandered. It's just not. I don't know. It's ignored. I don't know why.
But if look at it, like for example, like every time I look on Instagram or social media, they've got the classes everywhere, art therapy, and I think this is so important.
Yeah.
It's not even therapy, just it's more like open up your soul because you see, for example, like
It's just reconnecting with who you are as a human being.
Exactly,
That's all
exactly.
it is. It shouldn't be called therapy.
because we are. What's the book called?
Yeah. That's a really convenient way of leading into a book that is very sort of meaningful to us, called Homo Aestheticus by. And I'm just trying to think of the lady's surname, Desanayaki. I think I've pronounced it correctly. Anyway, you can Google it. But I thought it was just fascinating that this writer said that rather than call human beings Homo erectus, rather than categorizing us all as, upright hominids, we should characterize our species as Homo aestheticus. And that to me, really speaks about a fundamental shift in the way we look at human beings. In other words, the essence of a human being is not that they walk upright, but that they make art. And I'm thinking if everybody realized that art is essential to a human being, some sort of, and the problem is we get so bogged down in society with judging about judgments about what art is something art, is it not art? But it's any form of expressiveness, anything at all. And all I would argue is that the less conventional it is, in other words, the less it can be regularly judged by defined principles of aesthetics. In other words, the more abstract and experimental it is, the more spontaneous it is, the more personal it is. And you should never look at that as being more or less worthy than something that is judged as having more figurative, if you like, or realistic skills that create more figurative or realistic art. So, in other words, it's really any form of human expressiveness.
But it's really interesting because I think abstraction is already next step. Because if you look at it, like when we start, when expression,
But that's a subjective. That's totally
when
subjective.
when abstract actually become like really, really visible, like after we introduced the photography, isn't it? This is pretty much
Well, about the same time.
Yeah, but at the same time,
At the
it's
turn
not,
of last century.
exactly. It's not just disappeared because it's had some kind of.
Well, probably photography probably pulled the rug out of figurative painting, because here you could just basically use a chemical process to do what an artist took, weeks or months or whatever to
But
do.
it's really
So artists were
interesting
looking
because
for another
when-
way to.
When Aelita was a kid, because you see, she constantly would draw like realistically, like she would draw her thoughts, to remember. If somebody said her something, like she would draw it to remember. Like it's exactly like at school, she was
But it
drawing.
wasn't realistic.
Yes, realistic drawings. She would constantly do realistic drawings, and it was really interesting because I went to her principal, school principal, and she would constantly draw in front of a principal and talk to her and draw to her. Yes, because like she actually explained it to her. This is like how she's not recording their conversation, but this is how she's try to memorize it by drawing. And it's just was really interesting because this is why, like, first complaint I was getting from school about Aelita, because she says a teacher was saying to me, look, I want her to stop drawing when I'm talking because she has to concentrate and listen to me instead of drawing. But this is Aelita's way to remember things by drawing, constantly draw, because she would draw non-stop pretty much, realistic drawing is non-stop. And it's just like, it's really interesting because it went in parallel. You got abstraction, you got realistic drawings, and she's like really like loves doing it. But what's really interesting, she also like contradicted herself as well, because she said, Mom, I really prefer abstraction and I love abstraction because you can express your thought, you can express what you think, you can really be intricate with everything. But she says you can't, realistic painting can't express like world around us perfectly like nature can, because you can't breathe the life into the sculpture, you can't do any of this. Anything we do is just a really sort of poor of representation of what we see. And now she's questioning it as well, because she says, look, I don't even know what I see is real. Maybe it's holographic reality. How can we know? Which is like really, really bothers her. And she on this point, she's become really unstable and sort of not unstable, but she's really sad. And it's really painful for her that all this gorgeous and beautiful reality around us, what actually nature built, it's all maybe even holographic reality. But that's what I really would like to point it out, because she thinks like you can't copy what you think, what you see. This is just like beyond us as humans, like to copy the nature. We better sort of like express ourselves, what we feel, and this is why she's expressing herself with abstraction, which is like quite amazing, for a child to think like this. And I just like to again point it out that children are so creative, so imaginative, and so clever. We just really have to maybe try to talk to them on different level and constantly have a two-way conversation and just learn from them, because you see, we learned so much from Aelita during all these 12 years. And it's a fascinating, just always two-way conversation, because it's we always treated Aelita equally. It's very difficult, of course, and challenging with a kid, because you're still parent, you still have to set the rules, you still have to make sure, like.
I think it's adult arrogance too. You always want to kind of exert your
I,
power and influence. It's always a political game with kids. That's
but
the
look,
problem.
it's not just with the kids. We are creatures this way. You know what I mean?
You know,
Like
we like to be prescriptive. You know, you have to fall into
Prescriptive,
line. You have to
and
do whatever
also
program we've created.
it's a power game. It's if you
Of
look at it, it's a little bit of a
course,
power
yeah,
game
of course it
because
is.
this is what we do in a society. This is what we do on a political arena.
But I
It's
think
just
we-
all
we-
power game as
yeah.
well. Like who is one up?
Yeah, but I think, but the interesting thing with Alita is, I think we actually were really excited to see whatever Alita would do on her own, because Alita was our first daughter. I mean, we were married 17 years before we had Alita, so I guess for us it was just so fascinating to see what a person who has no formal education, no indoctrination of history, hasn't been what I would sort of call brainwashed by any adult information or just so. In other words, you've got an incredibly vibrant and highly developed mind. So it was actually the opposite, because we were so fascinated to see what someone in that position would do if left on their own, but given, let's call it quality creative materials, and just simply left to their own devices. I mean, I find it difficult to understand why adults are not fascinated by that, because I was. I mean, I'm thinking, here is a person who is in a uniquely different position to me, and I would probably say most adults. I mean, you look at, for example, famous abstract artists, like you look at Jackson Pollock, for example, and the only way that he could really enter into a childlike state was, through alcohol, or the only way that I think, in a way, when adults take drugs and alcohol, they're kind of trying to enter this childhood state, a state that's they're trying to enter this kind of world of freedom and innocence and lack of inhibition, because little kids are uninhibited, and the only way that an adult becomes so closed with all these layers of inhibition, that the only way they can remove it is through external substances, basically. And so that's why I thought, surely it's fascinating if you see somebody in a natural state being able to express themselves. In other words, they're absolutely. I mean, it's almost like. It's almost like an alien. It's just somebody who has literally come from another world, who is completely, I would say, innocent in the purest sense. I mean, they're completely ignorant in the most creative way of your of all your ideologies and your knowledge and all of your cultural. All of the kind of aspects of your culture, like they're free of everything. So I would have thought that's the most interesting thing, is to witness a person in that situation, experimenting, because they're intuitively going to go into all sorts of areas and just explore things that it would be very unlikely for you to do. And I think that's what Alita expressed in all of her early paintings, which were shown in her solo show in New York when she was merely 4 years old. She was just a 4-year-old, and all these works were done when she was a tiny little kid, and I think that's what to me, I think to both of us, was really really fascinating.
It's just so important to be youthful. And it, of course, like try to.
Well, to maintain the energy and wonder of youth, you look at, as you said, you look at, some people who are, septuagenarians or octogenarians or whatever. They're really old, but they seem to have a sparkle in their eyes. They seem to be so alive, and they're actually looking to the future. They're actually looking to what they can do ahead. They're not looking backwards. It's just a personal thing of mine, but it really sort of annoys me, because the older a person gets, their natural inclination would be to look backwards, because there's far more behind them than there is ahead. But they're purely looking at it in terms of, physical units of time, like X number of years or whatever. They're not looking at it in an abstract way about, I have been alive on this earth for so long, like Kusama, or or anybody who's at that age, and to say, all right, I have all those years of accumulated knowledge and experience that I can actually express going forward.
I think is fascinating, be crazy and be young.
That's it.